Hey everybody, this is Eno and welcome. I'm actually excited about this video today. Get to do something I actually really like to do this time of year. It comes to like late winter, early spring. I like to make alcohol stoves for the year. I do a lot of camping, backpacking, hiking, all that sort of stuff, and I love to use alcohol stoves as my primary means of cooking food, boiling water, so on and so forth. And alcohol stoves are, in my opinion, the cheapest and easiest way to do that. They're super lightweight, they take up very little room, they use really inexpensive fuel, and they're dirt cheap to make yourself. Why waste money on expensive stoves and fuel cans and all that crap when you can have something that is way lighter, way easier to use, is less expensive to maintain and run, and is dirt cheap to make yourself at home. And it's a cool little DIY project, and it's an excellent prepper skill for everybody out there to have. So these are commonly called can stoves or soda can stoves. One of the stoves we're going to be looking at is called a cat can stove. I have split this up into my top 3 favorite alcohol stoves that you can make at home today, probably from stuff you just have laying around the house, and you're going to have some pretty nice stoves that you can put in your bug out bag or use camping or hiking or whatever. So the first stove that we're going to do, and I'm going to build all 3 of these for you here today, this might be a long video, I'm just warning you, is going to be the double-walled soda can stove, which I have one there. You can make it out of a regular 12-ounce soda can. You're going to need 2 of them, like that. If you want a little bit larger fuel capacity, you can make them out of the 24-ounce beer cans. That results in a slightly larger stove. So if you're looking for something that has a little bit more fuel capacity, that's the way to go. We're also going to do the penny stove, and my third one is going to be the cat can stove. So 3 stoves that we're going to make for you today. So without further ado, let's get into this. All right, I am going to put on some Kevlar gloves. Not that I'm accident prone, but I don't want to make an ass of myself on a video. Okay, so here we go. The first stove we're going to make is the double-walled stove. And to do that, we're going to need 2 cans. They don't have to be pint cans like this. They can just be regular soda cans. I typically will start saving cans around the house for a few weeks before I want to do this. And by the time I get around to doing this, I'll have, you know, a pile of cans, and we'll make probably a half dozen stoves or so. Different types, and we'll use them throughout the year and loan them out to people. My wife uses them and so on and so forth. So we're going to need 2 cans. I'm going to try to do this with as simply and easily as you possibly can. So I don't want to have a lot of really complex tools going on here. So I got a marker. Oops. I got a pair of scissors, a knife, an extra blade, and a roll of tape. That's pretty much all we're going to need. So behoove you to have a ruler also. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn these upside down. Let's see which one I like better. This one has a good bottom. And I'm going to get a push pin. All right. So I like to do this before I start cutting the can apart, just because right now the can has the most structural integrity. So it's just easier to do this before you start cutting it apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually punch the holes in the top of the can that the flame will come out of. So we're just going to use a push pin, and I'm going to start just randomly, doesn't matter. There we go. And then I'm going to do one straight across from it. Go. I'm going to split that in half. Okay, now I'm going to split these 4 in half. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's okay if they're a little bit off, if they're not quite equidistant. Trust me, it'll work just fine. In fact, that's kind of the beauty of these things, is they're really simple and homemade. And okay, so now we're going to break each one of those in half. So we're coming up with, if I'm doing my math correctly, I think we're coming up with about 32 holes in total. I don't know, I'm not really keeping track. I'm sure some people be able to do math better than I can. After you get down to the end here, that push pin is a little dull. You're going to blunt that tip, and it's a little harder to push through. If you want to switch to a new one, it'll make these last few a little easier. But we'll make it through. One more, and we're done. Come on. There we go. Okay. So now we've made all of our fuel holes along the side there. Again, they're not perfect. I didn't measure them. I didn't mark them out. You don't need to. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut the inner part of the bottom out. And we're going to go right along this little ridge on the bottom of the can. And to do that, we're going to use our utility knife. And I'm barely applying any pressure to the knife at this point. I'm just going to score a line along that ridge. And I'm moving the can, not the knife. So I'm just going to score a line there. Oops. There we go. Okay, now we're on 2. I'm going to apply a little bit more pressure to the blade. Okay, now we're on 3. I'm going to actually put a decent amount of pressure on this blade. And at some point in time, I'm going to break through. When you break through, your knife will stop. Kind of right there. That happens, I'm just going to reposition. There we go. We're almost done here. I broke through again. There we go. Usually about 3 or 4 times around will result in the desired effect. So, as you can see, I broke through again. You can just push it through. And I'm just going to leave it in there. So there it is. Grab some sandpaper. Down here. Longer. A little piece of sandpaper. This is just the first thing I grabbed. It's 220 grit. And I'm just going to... That's a pretty jagged edge right there. So it's a good idea just to sand that up. Smooth it out. There we go. Okay. Now, we're going to go ahead and cut these. We're ready to cut. So, both cans right side up. I'm going to take a roll of tape. This is the 1.25 inches. Is that right? 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches thick tape. It's just painter's tape. And a blade. And I'm just going to set the blade right on top of the roll of tape and just score a line all the way around. Again, moving the can, not the blade. And just like with the bottom, you're going to make a couple of rotations around and you eventually break through. There we go, broke through right there. Somewhere around here I broke through. There it is. There we go. And we're going to do the exact same thing to the other one. This is the one that we haven't done anything to. All we're going to do is cut the bottom off. This is going to be the bottom of our stove. So, it's important to know this height that we're using. And it's the reason why I like to use the roll of tape, because we know that this roll of tape is 1.5 inches thick. Because when we make our inner wall, that inner wall has to be 1/4 inch longer than this measurement that we're using here. So you have to know this measurement. If you cut it arbitrarily, you would have to measure it and then figure out where you're at so you know what the next one is. So it behooves you to use something of a known dimension for this. There we go. So now we have our top and our bottom. I'm going to grab some paper towel. I rinsed these out earlier, so there's a little bit of water in there. Good idea to rinse these out just so you don't have beer or soda or whatever screwing everything up. Okay, there we go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of the cans, doesn't matter which one, and we're going to cut up the middle like that, and then we're going to cut a strip from it. Just like that. You can use that, you can trim that down and use it as your snuffer to hold on to that. So now we have this piece. And again, we know that this roll was 1.5 inches wide. So we want to add a 1/4 inch, which would be 1 3/4 inches. Oops. Just all over the place here, aren't I? And we're going to go ahead and mark 1 3/4 inches there. And 1 3/4 inches there. Connect those two. There we go. And now we're going to cut that out. Just with a pair of scissors. Alright, so there you go. I'm going to take the end of it and I'm going to snip off about 1/2 inch. Okay, so now I'm going to take the bottom, and if you notice there's a small ridge right along the bottom of the can, and I'm going to match this inner wall to fall right into that little groove. And what it does is it creates an inner and an outer wall with a little space between it. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to, it doesn't have to be super tight, just sort of in the ballpark there. There we go. And then where the two overlap, right in the middle, I'm going to make a mark on each side. Just like that. And then I'm going to take and cut halfway up on each one of those marks. There's one mark, there's the other mark. So we'll cut about halfway up on that one. There we go. And now I'm going to overlap these so the two tails go in the inside. Come on, there we go. There we go. And that creates our inner wall. Okay. So that drops on there just like that. Okay, but before we put this together, we have to trim a couple of little notches in the inside. I like to trim 3. Just little notches. Just like that. So the fuel, when you put it in, has a way to get from the inner wall to the outer wall. So from the inner area to the outer area. Otherwise, your stove won't work. Okay, so I cut 3 little notches in the bottom. The notches go down, just like that. And now, again, as I mentioned before, you can put insulation in there if you want. Some people use cotton batting. I've seen some people use steel wool, which doesn't wick really well, but you can use it. In my opinion, it's unnecessary, so I get along just fine without it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to slip the top into the bottom, and it's really hard to do this without sort of deforming it, and that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to kind of bend this around and get it to fit. There we go. Caught on something there. There we go. And if you'll notice, it kind of gets bent up there. That's okay. Just stick your finger in the inside and just push it back up with your finger. There we go. Okay. And now I'm just going to slide this down. And what we're going to do is we're going to push this down so that inner wall that we put in there goes up into this raised lip here, which is why the inner wall is taller than the stove itself, or at least the two sides that we cut. So just going to push this down, and that creates the seal between the inner part and the outer part. And there it is. Now the first time you light this and run this and it heats up, this paint along the outside will actually start to melt, and it will help seal the whole thing up so you won't get any leaks around that seam right there. And that's it, right there. We're all done. That's a double-walled stove. Isn't that easy? Easy peasy, Japanesey. Double-walled stove. Let's move on to the penny stove. Alright, so for our second stove, we're going to make a penny stove. And this stove is going to be a little bit smaller and slightly different construction, but we're still going to use 2 cans. The construction process is similar to the double-walled stove, but it's a little bit more simplistic. So the first thing we're going to do is exactly how we started the first one. So let me grab another push pin here. I'll start with a fresh one. And we're going to do the same thing we did on the first one. Okay, so there we are. Got all our holes punched. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a nail, and we're going to, instead of cutting the bottom out like we did on the last one, we're going to put a kind of a bigger hole right in the center of the top. Grab a hammer here. So we're just going to take a nail right down the center. There we go. It doesn't have to be perfect, just as long as it's somewhere in the center. There we go. Again, perfect? No. Work? Yes. Okay. Now we're going to cut our bottoms off, just like we did with the last two. Although this time I'm going to use just a regular roll of tape. So this is about 1 inch thick as opposed to the last one we used, which was 1.5 inches. So this is going to be a slightly shorter stove, which I'll show you why in a little bit. Okay, so same process here. Diet Squirt. I don't even know where I got these from, to be honest with you. Usually pick them up from work and stuff. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So once again, I got a little water in there for rinsing them out. So I'm just going to sop that up a little bit. So in the bottom one, which is the one we didn't poke any holes in, I'm going to take a needle nose pliers. I'm just going to do a little bit of crimping along the rim. So not much, just a little bit. So you can see we crimped the top edge, and now what we're going to do is just put the top on. This is going to fit pretty easily, but you want to be careful because you don't want to like collapse the whole thing. You just want to bring it down equal distance all the way around, And be careful with this one. The reason why we can crimp this one, or the reason why we have to crimp this one, is because I can't stick my finger in it like I did with the last one and you know, pop out any dents or anything like that that we put in it trying to get it on. We have to get this right the first time, and it's got to work. So we're going to bring the lip of the top part almost all the way down to where the paint ends on the bottom one. Okay. And again, the first time we light this and we fire this sucker up, that paint's going to melt a little bit and it will help to seal this all up. You just want to go slow here and be careful. Don't apply too much pressure or you're just going to push that bottom right up into the top. And it's not the end of the world. All you have to do is stick your nail back into that hole and push it back out again. But if you can avoid doing that in the first place, it's a good thing. Okay. That looks pretty good. And there we go. That's our penny stove. All done. All right, let's go on to our last stove. Okay, the final stove that is quite possibly my favorite, and I'll demonstrate all three of these in just a second, is the cat can stove. There, it's done. Look at that. I opened it and took the label off and removed the contents. This was actually, this actually wasn't cat food, this was actually tuna. And it just had a pull top, pulled it right off, you know, consumed the tuna, and then pulled the label off, cleaned it all out, and it is now a stove. Fill it full of alcohol, and it's ready to go. You don't need to do anything more than just this. It's the easiest alcohol stove in the world. And this is actually the stove that I tend to use more than the other two that I just demonstrated for you. But let's go ahead and fire all three of them up and show you how I use them. And then that way you can see my three favorite stoves, and maybe from these three favorite stoves that I have, you'll pick one that you might want to try. Okay, so we have our three stoves out here. We have our double-walled stove that we made, the penny stove that we made, and our cat can stove. This is how I use these three stoves. Now, you can't just take your vessel that you're going to boil water in or whatever and just stick it on top of the stove. You'll snuff it out. You have to have something that surrounds the stove that allows you to lift whatever you're having, whatever your cooking vessel is, off and be exposed to the flame without snuffing it. And also, these are pretty small. Fine on the tabletop here, but if you get them on uneven ground, you set them on the ground, they can tip really easily. So it's important to understand that. You've got fuel in there and it's on fire, and you can't just turn it off if the thing collapses, falls over, or whatever. So you got to be a little bit careful with it. So the first thing that you can do with the cat can stove and the penny stove, the reason why I like them is because you can actually use them with an Esbit stove. And this is how I use these two stoves. So I'll take a typical Esbit stove with me. I throw out the crappy fuel tabs that are totally pointless, and I just put the alcohol container right in the center of the stove like that. For the cat can stove, you just stick it in there, put a couple ounces of, or however much fuel you need into the cat can stove, light it, and you've got a little platform here that you can put your container on top of to cook whatever you're going to cook. Same is true with the penny stove, and it's the reason why we made it as thin as we did, is because it will fit into an Esbit stove, just like that. So it's a really lightweight system. A lighter container of alcohol, and that is all the weight you have. It is minimalist, super ultra lightweight type of system. So with this stove, it's a little bit taller. It's not going to fit into a Esbit stove, but there are a couple other things that you can do with it. Some people will construct wind guards for these, windshields, and will double as something that you can pop your cup or a pot on top of. Other people will use some chicken wire and construct a little contraption that you can sort of grate over the top of it. Some wire over the top will work too. One of my favorite things to do is to use a food can. This actually was a peach can, I believe, and I cut a hole out of the side of it, and the rest of it is just regular can. Took the label off, and this acts as both my windshield and also as the something that I can put my pot on top of. So I can take my stove, fill it full of fuel, dump it down in there just like that. I have a little window on the side that I can light the stove with, and then I can just put my pot or my vessel right on top of that and go ahead and cook. It's going to add a little bit of weight, but it still is a very lightweight system. If you were to compare this to, a typical gas, white gas and stove setup, it's definitely much lighter weight than that. You can put all your cooking utensils, paraphernalia, and stuff like that in this pot with it, and it definitely is a nice way to go. So, and if something ever happens to it, if something breaks or it wears out or whatever, you buy a couple cans of soda, you buy a can of peaches, you consume the soda, you eat the peaches, and you got yourself a new setup ready to go. A little bit of construction and you're ready to roll. So let's go ahead and light these up. Okay, so I'm going to do this on a brick, just in case all hell breaks loose. So there's our double-walled stove, there's our penny stove, and of course our cat can stove. So let's get a little bit of alcohol and we'll fill each one of these up. You don't need a lot of alcohol in these stoves. So this penny stove can sometimes be a little bit of a pain in the butt. So all you're doing, oops, dripped a little, is you're just pouring the fuel right on the top there, and it just seeps down into that little hole that we cut, and that's all it needs. Okay, and then the cat food, that's all she is. Okay, let's get my fuel out of here. So there we are, and then we're going to go ahead and do that one too. And then what we're going to do is just drop our penny right on there. Our double-walled stove is on the end there, and it is priming at the moment, so you'll see the vents along the side coming on pretty soon. It takes about 30 seconds for that to prime. And then our cat can stove on the end there, it's just a can full of fuel. Alright, well, you can hear the fuel boiling now. All three stoves are rolling. Our penny stove is in the middle. Now, if you'll notice, I'll try to zoom in here. Alright, so all three stoves are going. They're all primed and rolling along here. So there's our cat can stove. Puts out a lot of heat, those things do, and very simple and easy to use. The center one there is our penny stove. The reason why they call it a penny stove is, you can tell in the center there, I threw a coin. And the coin is used to cover up that hole that we pop through the top there that we use to pour the fuel in, so that all the fuel is forced to go through the holes around the side that we popped in. So it creates a little bit more of a traditional burner effect. The last one there, actually our fuel's getting a little low there, I can tell. I didn't put a lot of fuel in these, so they're gonna burn out pretty quick here. So that is our double-walled stove. Definitely probably the most active of the three. A lot of heat coming out of that one. They're really, really efficient stoves. They do burn through the fuel a little quicker, but it is a hot flame. You will definitely boil whatever you're boiling a lot quicker with those guys. And so yeah, it's getting down to the end there. It's almost, so yeah, it's definitely, it's going to get ready to burn out here in just a second. It's going, it's going. I did not put an equal amount of fuel in these, so don't take that into consideration. But those double-walled stoves do tend to blow through fuel a little bit quicker. They are a more efficient stove, and they definitely burn hot. So the hotter the stove burns, the faster it will burn, because it will actually boil the fuel, and then the more you boil the fuel, our penny stove is starting to get on its last leg there. The flames start jumping around like that, you know it's about ready to go. So as you boil the fuel, yeah, there it goes. It actually will create more vapor, and the vapor is actually what burns, not the fuel itself. And the can stove is about ready to go here. It's dying out. So the more it burns, the hotter the fuel gets, the more it vaporizes, the more the vapor burns, the hotter the fuel gets, the more so it's kind of a vicious cycle. So the more efficient a stove is, usually the more fuel it will consume. So there we go. Those are our 3. Let's turn our light back on. Let's recap. All right, that cat can stove is actually still going, so I'm going to snuff it out here. There we go. So all 3 are now out. We still have a little bit of fuel left in our cat can stove. You can see they're all going to be pretty hot right now, so I'm not going to touch them. But the nice thing about an alcohol stove is they do cool down very, very quickly. So within really just a few minutes, they're cool enough to handle. So, in fact, yeah, that's not too bad. That's cool enough to handle there. This one here, you can see our coin. We will get our coin back there. So keep that for our next burn. And our cat can stove is still pretty warm. So there you go. My 3 favorite DIY stoves. Thanks for watching.